and welcome to my March reading wrap-up video. For us, the month of March came in like a lion and it left like a lion. We kicked off the month with sickness in our house, and so that meant quite a bit of reading time by the fire because it was also incredibly cold. Fortunately, we did have some beautiful weather days where we were healthy during the month, and I took the opportunity to visit a local tea house during that time so that I could sit out and read and also re-up my tea supplies. I'm just really grateful to be here talking with you today about the books that I read this month while drinking a delicious cup of tea. So hopefully you can also find something delicious to drink and sit down while we talk books. I am going to kick off my discussion today with Cashelmara by Susan Howatch. Cashelmara is over 600 pages, and in the beginning of the month, especially when I wasn't feeling the best, I was like, oh my gracious, why did I start such a thick book? Especially since I wanted to join all of those readathons, but as I got into it, it feels like a soap opera, really. It's just so much drama that goes on, and you really do get into this like page turner mode where you're like, you want to see how this is going to work out, how is this going to resolve. This is a book that I mentioned in my TBR video as one that I thought I had read when I was younger and enjoyed, but as I was reading it, I did not remember it. So my guess is that I saw this on my grandmother's bookshelf when I was growing up and just remembered the cover that way, because when I was reading it, I was like, I don't remember this at all. This is actually a story that is inspired by Edward I, Edward II, and Edward III in English history. So think like the 1200s time period. Susan Howatch used those three men in succession as characters in this novel, as well as their wives and just the treachery that was abound during that time. But Susan Howatch set this in like a 30-year period from 1860 roughly until the 1890s. And it was set in Ireland, as well as having some of the plot move us to the United States as well as England. So in this, we follow 5 different points of view. We have Edward, who represents Edward I. Then we have Marguerite, who is Edward's second wife. And then we have Patrick, who is representing Edward II. We have Patrick's wife, Sarah. And then we have Patrick and Sarah's oldest son, Ned, who represents Edward III. So to start off with, going into it, I was like, okay, I get it. We're doing this succession of, ancestry, and not only was it a historical fiction, but it was also a lot of family issues and marital challenges. So I really saw this as like a family saga, family drama. And it is that, but it got so juicy right at the end of Marguerite's section, which I think is about page 180. We realized that this is a lot more complicated than it appears in the first 150 pages and more salacious. So there definitely are content warnings for this book. There is non-consensual acts that occur in here that are very traumatic. They are on page, but this was written in the 1970s. There was not like explicit graphic depictions of it, but you did know what was happening in those non-consensual situations. The other content warnings is that Edward II, I learned through reading this, was thought to be in illicit, secretive, same-sex relationships. So even though he was married and having children, it's thought that he had relationships with men in his life, and Susan Howatch explores that fully. And so the terminology and the language around that is not the most gentle or accepting. Now, part of that is because, Patrick, our Edward II, is married. He is in a monogamous, committed relationship. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it enough that I bought Penmaric. Anyway, I'm going to hopefully get to Penmaric later this year is my goal, because I really enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying these 1970s era family saga tomes. It's just kind of like the mood that I'm in right now. So I will definitely be interested in reading more of Susan Howatch's books. For the March Mystery Madness readathon, I read The Mystery of the Yellow Room by Gaston Leroux. He is the author of Phantom of the Opera, which I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed Mystery of the Yellow Room, but I definitely think it lagged in the middle. So in this, we follow a reporter. He's young, he's impetuous, he's a genius. He's able to figure out a lot of mysteries and puzzles. He ends up coming to the Chateau du Glandier, where the Stangerson family lives. This family is a father-daughter scientist duo, and one night, the Mademoiselle Stangerson has an attempt on her life, and she goes in, she locks herself into her room, and shortly thereafter, you hear murder, help, murder, murder, and they can't get the door open because she's locked it. And by the time they get in, she has been knocked unconscious. But it doesn't seem like there's any way that an attacker could have gotten in or out of that room. And so we follow this journalist and a friend of his. We also get the perspective of other characters who have written out their experiences, and so we kind of jump around a little bit there. I do think that the back of this particular copy, which is a mint edition, makes you suspicious of a character that I don't know if I would have been suspicious of this character so early on if I hadn't read just this short little blurb. It's literally 2 sentences, and I think it gives too much away. So all of that to say, I did love the diagrams that were in this, and while the back gave it away, so I think I knew who the culprit was, I didn't know the full story of why. The reveal of that, again, this is where I think the pacing was a little bit challenging. I would have liked more exploration on the reveal and what had happened to get us there. At the beginning, there was just a lot of lag where it just felt very repetitive. We also skipped a couple months in here, and so I do think that the mystery is very creative. I said in my rainy day reading vlog that it reminded me of The Adventure of the Speckled Band, and it does, despite the reveal being totally different. The concept is there, and it just was very reminiscent of that. So I did get to finish this for the March Mystery Readathon. And then I also read Murder at an Irish Village by Carleen O'Connor. I listened to this. I also had the book so that when things got really intense, I could get to the book and read fast and then get back to the audio when I was doing other things. So I really enjoyed this. I read the Christmas book, which was the 6th book in the series, at Christmas time, and I loved it so much. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back and start this again, and I enjoy it. In this, we have Siobhan. She is a young girl who has the responsibility of her 5 other siblings, I think. She has an older brother, but he is not the one who seems to be responsible for everybody. It's her. And they are running a little cafe. They lost their parents the year before in a tragic drunk driving accident, which when we start, that is kind of where we start, is a year later. So they've started to go through the grieving process, but it's still very difficult. And again, she's responsible for running the bistro and taking care of all of her siblings. And one morning they come down, and somebody who they do not like, that really feels like an arch nemesis to their family, is found dead inside their bistro. And so, of course, they are looked at as the target. There is a slight romance in there. We get to know all of the people in the village who are peripheral but very important. We follow all of these red herrings along with the main character who's like trying to figure out who has set them up really and also murdered this person. So I thought it was great. I actually didn't see it coming. I followed the red herring stupidly where I was like, I think it's that person. But then when the reveal happened, I was like, oh, okay. And I remember when there was an interaction with this person in the book, I remember thinking like, that's kind of an odd thing that happened, but it just kind of kept going and I didn't really stick on that. So I thought it was great. Definitely want to keep going. It's an enjoyable series. I love the narrator of the book. She's got this beautiful Irish brogue and it's just fantastic. So I really enjoyed that. Also my second book for the March Madness readathon. I read 2 books that were not at all on my TBR for the month. And the first one is the Forget Me Not Library by Heather Weber. You absolutely will get more details about how much I love this book in my summer recommendations video because I am going to add this as a book that everyone should read in the summer. This is my favorite Heather Weber book that I have read so far. So we have 2 characters that we follow their thoughts on. We've got Juliet. She is on a road trip. She has tragically lost her grandfather and also much of her memory, other than just some short-term memory, maybe from the last few months. And she's decided to go on a road trip before she is required to be back at her job as a school nurse in August. She takes a detour and she ends up with her car spluttering out, not working. There's smoke coming out of it right outside of a house in Forget-Me-Not. The house actually belongs to Ten, who is Tallulah's grandfather. And Tallulah has come back with her 2 daughters to live with her grandfather after a painful divorce. So Juliet ends up, renting a room in their house, and we follow her story as well as Tallulah's story and perspective. There is romance. There are literary references because Tallulah works in a library. I love the literary references. There's this funny scene where a woman comes into the library who also is newly divorced, and she has like one of those romance books that are a little spicy, and the librarians are worried that she's going to complain, and she's like, oh, I need more of those. Just really humorous and funny. But, realize that there is pain in this. We're also following some characters that are in a hospice care facility with terminal illness. And I loved it so much. Right now, I don't think it's out in paperback, but all my other Heather Weber books are in paperback. So I am going to hold off and get it this fall when it comes out in paperback. A book that just came out this week that I was able to read an e-arc of is The Faraway Inn by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a YA cozy fantasy novel. We have Kalisa. She is 16, I think, and she is leaving her New York City location to go and stay with her great aunt in Vermont at her Faraway Inn, which is a bed and breakfast. Kalisa hasn't been there for years. Her nuclear family consists of 2 moms. Her moms had brought her there when she was younger, but there was a falling out and she hasn't been there in a long time. But she herself is going through teenage angst from a breakup. And so her moms are like, hey, go and stay with your great aunt. The problem is great aunt Z doesn't want her there. And really from the moment she gets there, she realizes that there is something really odd about this inn. She sees movement in mirrors as she's walking by, but when she looks, there's nothing there. She'll come into a room that she's just left, and the fire is roaring, and there's hot tea ready for her. So just really bizarre, unexplainable things. Her aunt is really she's speaking in monosyllables, just grunts. There is a handyman who is a young man. I think he's probably a little bit older than Kalisa is. He's been homeschooled and he helps out at the inn. His dad has been missing. He left with a purpose, a legitimate purpose, but has not come back, and he's missing. And this poor young man is really sad about it. It is just, cozy fantasy is something that I increasingly enjoy as I get older, and this is the coziest. It definitely feels YA. The romance is very wholesome, but also just kind of the thought processes. I do think there is a maturity that we absolutely see from beginning to end, which I love. You're not really kind of feeling like, the character is staying static. You can definitely see growth and maturity, which I also really enjoyed. There is a lot of elements within the plot that move it along. It is a fast read, really enjoyable, and something that I also will be recommending for my summer recommendations because she goes to Vermont for the summer. So it's very perfectly set if you like that kind of YA fantasy coziness genre. We'll just move from older down to younger. I read 3 books for middle grade March, which is probably the least amount that I've ever read. So the first one was not at all on my TBR, and that is The Family at Caldicott Place by Noel Streatfeild. I enjoyed this so very much. So in this, we have a family of 3 children and a mother. The father has unfortunately been in an automobile accident and has lost faculties, memory, ability to handle things. So there's definitely like cognitive challenges that he is facing, and he's hospitalized. So the mother goes and has a meeting with his employer. They are going to get some money from insurance because the car accident was not the father's fault, but everything's very tenuous right now. And so the mother makes the decision that instead of living in a big house that she's got to take care of while the father's gone, that they will just move to kind of switch basically with an apartment with another employee at this place where the father works. And the children are devastated, mostly because they have to leave their dog Jelly at the house. They can't bring Jelly to the apartment. And they also have to leave all their stuff. Tim's got, train sets. It's just so very hard that on top of the trauma that they're dealing with, with their dad, that they're also going to have to move. The older boy in this is Bill, and it was kind of a shock to me at his age, which I feel like was maybe 12, that the mother relied so heavily on him. But again, this was a different time period, and maybe in those very traumatizing situations, the mother was just so overwhelmed. She's like, I need to have somebody to, share this load with me. So Bill ends up going to the hospital and seeing his father when the other children had not. And it was just really awful for him. It was very hard. So there is a lot of heavy in this, but there is a boon. Something happens, and the family is given a large house, manor to live in, and that is Caldicott Place. They don't have a lot of capital to be able to keep the staff on and to do maintenance. And so they become a boarding house of sorts for wealthy children whose parents sadly don't want them for the holidays, which is like really heartbreaking, right? As this began in the fall, I think we also cross over into Christmas. And then it ends in Easter. And so we get to know these wealthy children. They develop relationships. There's obviously this trauma with the father. It reminds me a little bit of Miracles of Maple Hill by Virginia Sorensen, slightly, just because the father has so many challenges. So it is just a beautiful, heartwarming story, and one that I really enjoyed. I also finished the Green Wild series by Pari Thompson. The prompt for this was an author who was BIPOC. The ending of this, of the 3 books in the Green Wild series, I enjoyed the first one the best. I thought the twist was great. I did not enjoy the twist in this last book, and I also think it happened too quick. There was so much going on. We had somebody who was like stranded on an island. We had other people who were on a ship, and then trying to get to the Amazon, and then we're there, and then all kinds of like political issues. There was a huge battle at the end. But I thought when the twist happened where we figured out what actually, who the bad person actually was, we didn't spend enough time on why that person ended up being the bad person. So I don't know. The ending for me was not my favorite. I would just recommend reading the first one. I thought the first one was fantastic. And then I also finished Tamara Pierce's the first book in the Song of the Lioness, and that is Alana, the First Adventure. I really enjoyed this first book. So we have Alana. She is a very strong-willed young girl. Her brother would prefer to be a sorcerer, and she wants to be a knight. And so they decide to switch, and she goes to this where she's like a page learning to be a knight in a castle, and she binds up her body and pretends to be a boy, Alan. And she is tough as nails. She gets into fist fights with the other boys who are bullies. She then goes and tries to get taught how to actually fight so that she can protect herself and to be as strong and be like one of the boys. It's very much as middle grade as far as us, we're going along with her as her body is changing, and she's having to deal with that in addition to pretending to be a boy. So in continuing this, I discovered that the additional books in this series age with her, and so the content ages with her. And so there's just a maturity of, things that happen romantically that I think move this series from middle grade more into young adult. I don't think there's anything explicit in it, but I do think there is inferred kind of involvement with boys that was not the case in this because she was such a tomboy. So I'm glad that I have read this because there is a lot of hype right now around this series. Illumicrate is doing special editions for this. I think it's only Illumicrate, but if Illumicrate has chosen it, there is a reason for that. So I'm glad I've read it and kind of understand what the series is about. It actually reminds me of Mercedes Lackey's The Complete Arrows trilogy. So the first one, which is Arrows of the Queen, is about a young girl who comes and goes to school to learn how to use magic and how to ride horses and bond with them and pair with them. And she's very young. So in the first one, we're in the school and we're dealing with kind of those young issues. But then as you move through the next two books in the series, the content gets very mature. She grows up, and so she starts to have relationships and involvement and all of that. And so it just, as I was reading it, it very much reminded me of this series as well. As I top off my tea, I did want to share that there was one book that I wanted to read but did not get to, and I'm really bummed about it. And so I'm guessing I'm just going to add it onto my April TBR, and that is This Rough Magic by Mary Stewart. It's not thick. It's only 250 pages. I love Mary Stewart. I absolutely should be able to get to this in a timely fashion, so I'm just going to add this to my April basket. I am really determined to get to this, and I am so disappointed that I just couldn't get to it, so I did want to mention that. That is what I read in the month of March. I would love to hear what you read, what your favorites were. Let me know if you've read any of these. I'd love to know your thoughts as well. So, as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time. Oh my goodness, what is her name?